The first thing I noticed wasn't the relentless gray rain lashing against my condo window. It was the single, silent vibration of my phone on the nightstand. It wasn't an alarm. It was an alert. I unlocked the screen and opened my banking app, my thumb hovering over the login. Savings account. Yesterday it held $28,000. My life savings. My escape fund. Today the digits stared back at me in stark, unforgiving black and white. 0.00. The transaction note was brief, clinical, and devastating. Family investment. Authorized by power of attorney. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at the gray Seattle sky and realized the truth. My father, Jeffrey, hadn't just borrowed money this time. He had erased me. Before we find out exactly who authorized this and why, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't call my father. I didn't throw the phone across the room. I simply walked to my kitchen island, brewed a pot of black coffee, and sat down to watch the rain streak against the glass. It was fitting weather for an audit. See, this theft wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the final line item in a ledger I had been keeping in my head for 27 years. In my family, I wasn't a daughter. I was the invisible fixer. I was the structural support beam that everyone leaned on but nobody bothered to paint. My sister Chloe was the golden child, the vibrant, chaotic influencer wannabe who needed constant investment, and my father Jeffrey was the CEO of our dysfunction. I thought back to 3 years ago. Chloe had decided she was going to be a lifestyle vlogger. She needed a camera, lights, a new wardrobe. Jeffrey told me it was an investment in the family brand. I paid $4,000. The channel lasted 3 weeks. I never saw a dime back. 2 years ago, Jeffrey's transmission blew on his vintage Jaguar. He called me not a tow truck. He said he was liquid asset poor at the moment. I paid $3,000. He didn't say thank you. He said, "Good girl." That was my currency. Usefulness. I took a sip of the bitter coffee and opened my laptop to the bank's security portal. I pulled up the authorization document for the transfer. There it was. A power of attorney form dated 5 years ago. I remembered that day. I was 22, lying in a hospital bed, recovering from an emergency appendectomy. Jeffrey had shoved the paper in front of me while I was still groggy from anesthesia. "Just in case complications happen," he'd said. "I need to be able to pay your bills if you're in a coma." I survived. I healed. I forgot the paper existed. He didn't. He filed it away like a spare key, waiting for the day he needed to unlock my life and empty it out. For a long time, I wondered why I let it happen. Why did I sign? Why did I pay for the camera, the car, the endless emergencies? Why didn't I scream sooner? Psychologists have a term for it. They call it learned helplessness. Imagine an elephant tied to a stake with a thin rope. The elephant could easily snap the rope and walk away. But it doesn't. Why? Because when it was a baby, it was tied with a heavy chain it couldn't break. It fought and fought, but the chain held. Eventually, the baby elephant learned that struggling was useless. It learned that the limit was absolute. So when it grew up, even though it became powerful enough to tear the stake out of the ground, it stopped trying. The rope isn't what holds the elephant. The memory of the chain does. That was me. I was the elephant. My father had conditioned me since I was a child to believe that my resources were community property. He taught me that my autonomy was a privilege he granted, not a right I possessed. I paid my rent for existing in this family with my silence and my savings. I believed that if I just gave enough, if I was useful enough, they wouldn't hurt me. But looking at that zero balance, the invisible chain finally snapped. The conditioning broke. This wasn't a family pooling resources to survive a crisis. This was a parasite killing its host. I wasn't safe. I was being harvested. I finished my coffee. The warmth didn't reach my chest, which remained cold and hollow. I wasn't going to cry about the money. Crying is for people who still have hope that the other person cares. I knew better now. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a declaration of war. I opened a new tab on my browser. It was time to change the locks. I sat at the kitchen island, the blue light of my laptop screen reflecting in my eyes. The digital lockout wasn't a tantrum. It was a quarantine procedure. Click. Revoke power of attorney. Confirm. Click. Freeze credit report at all 3 bureaus. Confirm. Click. Force logout on all devices. Confirm. I changed every password to a randomized string of 40 characters. I contacted the bank's fraud department and filed a sworn affidavit. I didn't ask for the money back yet. I just stopped the bleeding. It took 45 minutes to dismantle the access Jeffrey had enjoyed for 5 years. At 9:15, my phone rang. The screen lit up with the name Dad. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. On the 4th attempt, I picked up. I didn't say hello. I just pressed the phone to my ear and waited. Ashlyn, what the hell is going on with the bank portal? Jeffrey's voice wasn't guilty. It was annoyed. It was the tone of a CEO speaking to an incompetent IT department. I'm trying to transfer the remaining $2,000 to the holding account, and it's saying access denied. You need to call them. Fix it. Now. He wasn't calling to apologize for stealing $28,000. He was calling to complain that he couldn't steal the last two. I revoked the access, Jeffrey, I said. My voice sounded strange to me, flat metallic like a recording. You did what? The incredulity in his voice was genuine. Undo it. Immediately. We are in the middle of a crisis. Chloe's business investment went south. The creditors are not waiting. It wasn't a business investment, I said. It was online gambling debt. I saw the transaction codes on the statement before you hid them. It's a liquidity issue, he shouted, the facade slipping. She's your sister. If we don't pay this off by noon, they're going to garnish her wages. Do you want her reputation ruined? Do you want this family destroyed over a clerical error? I listened to him rant about family unity and sacrifices, and suddenly it all made sense. I realized why he could do this without a shred of remorse. It's called the trap of normalization. In a healthy family, individuals are separate trees in a forest growing side by side. In a narcissistic family system, the family is a single organism and the father is the brain. Everyone else is just a body part. Chloe was the heart, the vital organ that had to be protected at all costs, because she pumped the ego blood that kept Jeffrey feeling important. And me, I wasn't the heart. I was a limb. I was a kidney. Useful, sure. But if the heart is failing, you don't ask the kidney for permission to harvest its resources. You just take them. To Jeffrey, draining my account wasn't theft. It was just reallocating blood from a disposable part of the body to the vital one. He wasn't stealing from me because in his mind I didn't really exist as a separate person. I was just an extension of him. The money is gone, Ashlyn, he yelled, desperate now. We are one team. You are hoarding resources while the ship is sinking. I am not on the ship, I said. I am on the dock, and you just burned the bridge. I hung up. I didn't block him. I wanted him to know I was receiving his calls and choosing not to answer. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. It was Chloe. She had posted a video to her story. She was crying, the perfect single tear tracking down her cheek, filtered to look soft and vulnerable. It's just so hard, she whispered to her 50,000 followers, when the people who are supposed to support you turn out to be toxic. Some people want to see you fail just to make themselves feel superior. Please send good vibes. My family is going through it right now. My mutual friends started blowing up my phone. Is everything okay? Chloe seems devastated. Call your sister. I didn't respond to a single one. I closed the app. Let them have the noise. I had work to do. I grabbed my coat and keys. It was time to drive to the outskirts of the city. I needed to see the one person Jeffrey had tried to erase from our history. I drove north, leaving the glass and steel skyline of Seattle behind. The rain turned from a drizzle to a downpour as I crossed the county line into Snohomish. I was heading to the only place Jeffrey never visited. Aunt Christina lived in a small, weathered A-frame tucked behind a wall of Douglas firs. In my family, Christina was the cautionary tale. Jeffrey always referred to her as unstable or difficult. He told us she had cut herself off from the family because she was jealous of his success. I hadn't spoken to her in 7 years. But as I pulled into her gravel driveway, I realized that unstable was just Jeffrey's code word for uncontrollable. She was waiting on the porch, a cigarette burning in her hand, watching my car with sharp, intelligent eyes. She didn't look surprised. She looked like she had been checking her watch. I stepped out of the car. I didn't offer a hug. I didn't make small talk. He emptied the accounts, I said. Christina took a long drag of her cigarette and exhaled a plume of smoke into the wet air. 28,000. She guessed. How did you know? Because that's roughly the limit for a standard wire transfer without triggering a federal review, she said, turning to the door. Come inside. I've been keeping a file for you since you were 12. Her living room was small, cluttered with books and smelling of sage and old paper. It wasn't the sterile showroom my father lived in. It felt lived in. Safe. She went to a heavy iron safe in the corner, spun the dial with practiced ease, and pulled out a thick yellowed envelope. Jeffrey isn't a business genius, Ashlyn, she said, sitting across from me. He's a cannibal. He eats the people closest to him to keep himself fed. He did it to me 20 years ago. He stole our mother's jewelry to fund his first venture. When I threatened to call the police, he convinced everyone I was crazy. He cut me off to protect his narrative. She slid the envelope across the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. But he made a mistake, she continued. He forgot that our father, your grandfather, saw him clearly. Jeffrey thinks he owns the ancestral land in Skagit Valley. He thinks it's his crown jewel, his retirement plan, his leverage. He talks about developing it into luxury estates every Thanksgiving right. I nodded. The land. $350,000 of prime real estate. It was the only real asset Jeffrey had left. Read paragraph 4, Christina said. I opened the deed. It was an old document typed on a typewriter, the ink fading. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon until I hit the section she had highlighted in pink. The protection clause. In the event that any primary beneficiary is found to have committed proven financial malfeasance, fraud, or theft against any direct descendant of the grantor, their interest in this property shall be immediately forfeited. Ownership shall transfer in full to the victim of said malfeasance as restitution. I read it twice. The words were sharp, absolute, and lethal. My grandfather hadn't trusted his son. He had built a trapdoor into the inheritance, waiting for Jeffrey to slip. He doesn't know this is in here, I whispered. He never reads the fine print, Christina said, a cold smile touching her lips. He assumes ownership is absolute because he's a man and he's the father. He thinks he's the king. But this piece of paper says he's just a tenant on good behavior. I looked up at her. The weight of what I was holding made my hands tremble. Jeffrey had stolen $28,000 from me to save his ego. But in doing so, he had triggered a clause that would cost him $350,000. He had traded a pawn for a queen, and he didn't even know the board had changed. Why didn't you use this? I asked. Because he never stole cash from me, she said. He stole heirlooms. Harder to prove. But a wire transfer, a bank audit, that is undeniable proof of malfeasance. You have the smoking gun, Ashlyn. I'm just giving you the bullet. She reached out and tapped the document. He thinks you are weak. He thinks you will absorb the loss to keep the peace. Prove him wrong. I slid the deed back into the envelope. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like an executioner who had just been handed the warrant. Do you know a good lawyer? I asked. Christina pulled a business card from her pocket. I know the best one. He hates Jeffrey almost as much as I do. I took the card. I took the deed. I walked back to my car. The rain had stopped. The gray sky was breaking apart, revealing a hard, cold blue underneath. I wasn't driving back to Seattle to negotiate. I was going back to foreclose. The lawyer's office was in a glass tower that pierced the Seattle skyline, a stark contrast to Aunt Christina's hidden A-frame. His name was Marcus, and he didn't look like a man who engaged in small talk. He looked like a man who dismantled lives for a living. I sat across from him at a desk made of polished obsidian, the deed to the ancestral land resting between us like a loaded weapon. The clause is valid, Marcus said, his voice dry as dust. Ironclad, actually. Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing. He built a trapdoor into the estate, and your father just walked right over it. So we can file for forfeiture, I asked. We can, Marcus said. But before we pull the trigger, I did some digging. I wanted to understand the urgency. Why did a man with significant assets need to steal $28,000 in cash overnight? Why not liquidate a stock? Why not take a loan against the property? Why rob his own daughter? He turned his monitor around. On the screen was a scanned copy of a loan agreement from a private lending firm, the kind that operates in the gray areas of the law where interest rates are usurious and collections are aggressive. The loan amount was $28,000. The borrower listed was Chloe. But there was a co-signer. "Do you recognize this signature?" Marcus asked, zooming in. I leaned forward. The scrawl was jagged, rushed but unmistakable. Jeffrey P. Sterling. My father. "He co-signed it," I said, feeling a fresh wave of bitterness. "Of course he did. He enabled her gambling." "Look closer," Marcus said. He clicked a few keys, bringing up a comparison image. On the left was the signature on the loan document. On the right was the signature on the power of attorney form my father had used to rob me. "The pressure points are wrong," Marcus explained, tracing the loops with his cursor. "The slant on the J is too acute. And look at the date on the loan application. June 14th. Where was your father on June 14th? I thought back. He was in Cabo. He posts everything. He was at a golf retreat. Exactly, Marcus said. He wasn't in Seattle to sign a wet ink document. Ashlyn, your father didn't co-sign this loan. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt. Chloe forged it, I whispered. She forged his signature to get the money, Marcus confirmed. And when she lost it all gambling, the lenders came knocking. They didn't just want their money back. They told Jeffrey that the signature was contested. They threatened to turn the file over to the district attorney for identity theft and fraud, unless the balance was paid in full immediately. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs, the puzzle pieces slammed together into a picture so ugly I wanted to look away. Jeffrey hadn't drained my account just to save Chloe's credit score. He hadn't done it just because she was the favorite. He did it because he was cornered. If he didn't pay the debt, he would have to admit the signature was forged. If he admitted the signature was forged, he would have to send his golden child to prison for fraud. He had a choice: let Chloe face the consequences of her crime, or rob me to cover it up. He chose to rob me. He sacrificed the innocent daughter to save the criminal one. He made me the victim of a theft, to prevent Chloe from becoming an inmate. He's not just a thief, I said, my voice trembling with a cold new rage. He's an accessory after the fact. He used my money to obstruct justice. Marcus nodded slowly. Precisely. Which means his violation of the protection clause isn't just financial malfeasance. It is criminal conspiracy against a family member. This isn't a civil dispute anymore, Ashlyn. This is a felony. He closed the laptop. The sound was final, like a gavel striking wood. We have everything we need, Marcus said. The police report for the theft of your savings, the evidence of the forgery, and the deed. We don't just take the land, Ashlyn. We take his freedom. I looked at the rain streaking the window, blurring the city into gray smudges. For years, I had wondered why I wasn't enough for him, why I couldn't earn his protection. Now, I knew. I was never a person to him. I was collateral. I was the insurance policy he cashed in to save the thing he actually loved, his reflection in Chloe. Do it, I said. File the papers. Call the police. Marcus picked up the phone. You might want to stand back, he said. When this structure collapses, it's going to be loud. I didn't stand back. I wanted to watch it fall. The elevator ride to the penthouse of the Rainier Tower was silent. The mirrored walls reflected us, Marcus in his charcoal suit holding a leather portfolio like a weapon. 2 uniformed officers, impassive and imposing. And me. I looked different than I had 3 days ago. I wasn't the girl in the gray sweatpants staring at a zero balance. I was wearing a structured blazer, my hair pulled back. I looked like an auditor arriving for a surprise inspection. We stepped out onto the plush carpet of the hallway. Jeffrey's door was mahogany polished to a shine that probably cost more than my first car. I didn't knock. I let the officer do it. 3 sharp, authoritative raps that echoed like gunshots. It took a moment. Then the lock clicked. Jeffrey opened the door, a glass of scotch in his hand, wearing a cashmere sweater. He looked annoyed, expecting a delivery or a neighbor. When he saw me, his lip curled into that familiar sneer. Ashlyn, he sighed, not even looking at the people behind me yet. Finally came to your senses. Look, I'm willing to forgive the little tantrum with the bank portal, if you... Then he saw the badges. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a physical effect, like gravity pulling the blood into his shoes. He stumbled back a step. "What is this?" Jeffrey Sterling, the lead officer, asked. "We have a report filed regarding the unauthorized wire transfer of $28,000 from the accounts of Ashlyn Sterling." "That's a family matter," Jeffrey sputtered, his eyes darting between me and the police. "It was an internal transfer, a misunderstanding. Ashlyn, tell them." I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike and then taught me that I was only worth what I could pay. "It is not a misunderstanding," Marcus said, stepping forward. He handed Jeffrey a thick stack of papers. "This is a formal notification of civil action." Civil? Jeffrey laughed a high, nervous sound. "You're suing me for what emotional distress?" "For forfeiture," Marcus said. "Pursuant to the protection clause of the Sterling family deed." Jeffrey froze. He looked down at the papers. He saw the highlighted text, the same text Aunt Christina had showed me. "You committed financial malfeasance against a direct descendant," Marcus explained, his voice devoid of pity. "Under the terms of your father's will, that action triggers an immediate forfeiture of your interest in the Skagit Valley property. The ownership transfers to the victim as restitution." "You can't take the land," Jeffrey whispered. "That's my retirement. That's worth $300,000. $350," I corrected softly. Market value went up. "Ashlyn, please," he said, and for the first time in my life I saw real fear in his eyes. Not anger, terror. "You can't do this. Over 28 grand, I'll pay it back. I'll find the money. Don't take the land." "It's not about the money anymore, Dad," I said. "It's about the crime." "I didn't have a choice," he yelled, backing into the foyer. Chloe appeared in the hallway behind him, wearing a silk robe, looking confused. "Dad?" "Who is it?" she asked. Jeffrey spun around, pointing a shaking finger at her. The golden child was about to be smelted down. "It's her fault," he screamed at the officers. "She forged my signature. She took out the loans, I had to pay them off, or she was going to jail. I was protecting her. Arrest her." Chloe stopped cold. Her mouth fell open. The betrayal was absolute. The family organism was cannibalizing itself right in front of us. The brain was sacrificing the heart to save the skin. "Dad," Chloe whimpered. "She committed fraud," Jeffrey shouted, desperate to shift the narrative. "I was under duress. I shouldn't lose my property because she's a criminal." The officer stepped past him. "Ma'am, is that true? Did you sign the loan documents?" Chloe looked at Jeffrey, then at me. She saw the ruin in his face. She saw the cold indifference in mine. She realized there was no safety net left. No Ashlyn to pay the bill. No Jeffrey to cover the lie. She started to scream. It wasn't a word, just a sound of pure entitled panic. I watched them turn on each other, bickering and pleading, their perfect facade dissolving into a puddle of accusations. It was pathetic. It was necessary. Marcus touched my arm. "We're done here. The process servers have delivered the notice. The police have the confession on body cam." I turned to leave. Jeffrey lunged forward, grabbing the doorframe. "Ashlyn," he begged. "We are family. How can you bankrupt us like this?" I stopped. I looked back at the man who had drained my future while I slept. I looked at the sister who had forged a signature and let me pay the price. "I didn't bankrupt this family, Jeffrey," I said. The words felt like granite. "I just balanced the books." I walked away. I didn't hear the elevator ding. I only heard the sound of my own footsteps walking away from the wreckage, steady and sure. The legal dissolution of the Sterling family estate was quiet, efficient, and absolute. It didn't happen with a bang, but with the scratch of a pen and the stamp of a clerk. Jeffrey fought, of course. He hired a cheap lawyer who tried to argue that the protection clause was archaic, unenforceable. But Marcus destroyed them in summary judgment. The evidence of the forgery and the theft was irrefutable. The judge didn't just grant the forfeiture. He issued a restraining order against Jeffrey and Chloe for harassment. The ancestral land in Skagit Valley, the crown jewel Jeffrey had lorded over us for decades, was transferred to my name on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, I listed it for sale. I didn't want the land. I didn't want the history. I wanted the liquidation. It sold in 2 weeks to a conservation trust. The proceeds, $350,000, hit my account on a sunny afternoon. I sat in my new apartment, a sun-drenched loft in Ballard with floor-to-ceiling windows that faced south away from the gray storms of the past. I looked at the balance. It was a staggering number. But looking at it, I realized something profound. This wasn't just winning the lottery. This wasn't even just revenge. It was a harvest. There is a concept in philosophy called the justice of the sower. It distinguishes between two types of justice. There is retributive justice, which is about punishment, an eye for an eye. That's what happened to Jeffrey. He lost his land because he stole my savings. That was the punishment. But then there is restorative justice, the justice of the sower. This is about what you do with the ground once the weeds are pulled. For 27 years, my family had treated me like a field to be strip-mined. They took my energy, my money, my time, and my love, and they left me barren. They ate the seeds before I could ever plant them. Now, for the first time in my life, I held the seeds. This money wasn't just cash. It was potential. It was the graduate degree I never pursued because I was saving for Chloe's mistakes. It was the travel I never booked because Jeffrey might have an emergency. It was the down payment on a life that belonged solely exclusively to me. I wasn't just reimbursed. I was restored. I had reclaimed the capacity to grow. I called Aunt Christina to tell her the news. The land is gone, I told her. I sold it. Good, she said, her voice rasping with satisfaction. Jeffrey never deserved the dirt under his feet. You didn't just sell a property, Ashlyn. You sold the burden. I feel. Light, I admitted. That's what it feels like to drop the dead weight, she said. Now go live. That is the only revenge that lasts. I hung up and walked to the window. The sun was setting, turning the Olympic Mountains into a silhouette of purple and gold. My phone was silent. No demands, no crises, no notifications of theft. I had lost a father and a sister. I knew that grief would hit me eventually in quiet moments. But looking at the horizon, I knew I hadn't really lost a family. I had survived a parasite. I took a sip of my wine. It tasted like grapes, not vinegar. It tasted like ownership. I didn't bankrupt my family. I just finally permanently balanced the books. And for the first time, I was in the black. If you've ever had to be the villain in someone else's story just to survive in your own, share this video. You are not alone. And if you want to hear more stories about reclaiming your life, make sure you're subscribed.